All right, welcome back to the Introduction to Web Dev quiz series. Here we're at quiz number 6. This is going to be about file processing, node.js, JSON, SQL, and relational databases. All a lot of good fun. So let's get started on that first question. If the user doesn't provide all the parameters that we expect as a server, what error code should we return? A, 200, B, 400, C, 404, or D, 500. The correct answer here is 400. So 200 is the code for actually okay. It means that the request succeeded and the client should expect whatever information they wanted from their request. 400, however, means bad request. It means that somehow something that the client did made their request not go through correctly. So, for example, malformed request syntax, that would be what I'm talking about, where they didn't give us those parameters. Let's say, for example, it was a GET request and they needed to have like some sort of ID and they didn't have that. We would return a 400 error so that they're aware that, oh, on their side they did something wrong. A 404 error is not found, so like, for example, if the user is trying to find some sort of image and we don't actually have that image on our backend, we would give them a 404. And then a 500 is just a server error, so you don't see these ones as often as the other ones, but this is just the server had some sort of issue and you might want to try again later. All right, next question. What is the benefit of factoring JSON into its own file instead of keeping it as a variable in a JavaScript file? A, you can add data to the JSON outside of that JavaScript file. B, you could use the same data across different JavaScript files. C, both A and B. Or D, neither A nor B. The correct answer here is C. Yeah, so let's set up sort of a situation. So file 1.javascript is using the data in data.json, and maybe it appends to it and maybe it reads some of that information. If we just had all of that JSON inlined into some sort of like constant JSON, and then we had all of our JSON, what this means is that file 2 can't actually access that JSON. So we want to export it into its own file so that file 2 can also append to it, read from it, etc. And then all the changes that file 2 does to data.json, file 1 can also read from. So factoring JSON out into its own file is good for that. It's also good just for readability because when I see these 3 files, I see, okay, we've got 2 JavaScript files, 1 JSON file, versus if you nested this JSON inside of file 1 or file 2, it might get a bit lost. So just good for structure as well. All right, next question. Because FS is a core module, we need to run npm install to install it. A, true, B, false. This is false. Yeah, so keyword here, key phrase is core module. What this means is it's included, so we don't actually need to run npm install. However, when we were using Express, we did have to do npm install Express to add that package to our node. But core modules, they exist. You can just use them. You don't need to npm install anything. All right, next question. fs.readFile returns a promise. A, true, B, false. The correct answer here is true. So if you go to the node.js docs, you'll see that fs.readFile asynchronously reads the entire contents of the file. Anytime you see that word, asynchronously, I keep pronouncing it both ways, I don't know. Asynchronously means it could fail, it could succeed, and so what fs.readFile does is it gives you a promise back and it says, I promise I'll give you a response, but it might happen in the future, it might be a failure, it might be a success. So yes, the correct answer here is true. It does return a promise. All right, next question. we should always append to an existing JSON file when we're writing new JSON data into it. A, true, B, false. The correct answer here is false. So a bit of a tricky question here, but we've got this word always. And I mean, you don't always want to append to it. Maybe you want to override some sort of data within that JSON file. Let's say, for example, that you allow your user to do a post request, and that post request overrides whatever data they had before. Like, sometimes we want to write to that file. And so if that file already exists, fs.write file will replace it, which is kind of neat, Let's say, for example, you asked a user what their favorite animal was, and the first time they visit the website, they say it's a cat, obviously, superior animal. Let's say something happens to them and suddenly they want to change that to dog. You could just erase that whole JSON file that has, I guess, just like their username or an ID of some sort and favorite animal and cat, and erase it, use fs.write file to have dog as that entry. This is pretty neat, but it's also a little bit dangerous because if you're not careful, you might override data that you don't intend to override. So make sure that when you're using fs.write file, that file doesn't already exist, so that, that file doesn't just disappear because you meant to append to it instead of writing to it.